In February 2022, the invasion of Ukraine brought Chelsea Football Club and its media-shy chairman, Roman Abramovich, into the spotlight. The oligarch was one of a handful of Russians accused of having clear connections to the Kremlin. The issue quickly reached boiling point 2 weeks after the war had begun. March the 2nd, 2022, Sir Keir Starmer, who of course was then leader of the opposition, was calling for Abramovich to be sanctioned at Prime Minister's questions.
Mr. Speaker, Roman Abramovich is the owner of Chelsea Football Club and various other high-value assets in the United Kingdom. He's a person of interest to the Home Office because of his links to the Russian state and his public association with corrupt activity and practices. Last week, the Prime Minister said that Abramovich is facing sanctions. He later corrected the record to say that he isn't. Well, why on earth isn't he?
Later that day, indeed, Chelsea was put up for sale. And by May, Roman Abramovich had sold the club. There were 3 tense and troubling months for its fans and its management leading up to that sale. And the story of those 3 months, the negotiations that took place, is now told in a new book, Sanctioned, the inside story of the sale of Chelsea FC. And it's written by the journalist Nick Purewal, who joins me now. Welcome to the show. So, Nick, give us a quick overview. Who is Roman Abramovich? How did he come to own Chelsea? And he owned it for sort of almost 20 years before this happened.
Well, he bought Chelsea in 2003 and then went on to transform Chelsea, the Premier League and global football with the vast investment he brought into the game. He was really the first of the super owners that helped transform what the Premier League into what is now a global behemoth. And really he was able to shift the paradigm to the point where the game's never really looked back for better or worse, whatever you think about what that's done to the game. It's completely transformed. And then obviously in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, he quite quickly understood that his position was effectively untenable. I think he hoped that he wouldn't be sanctioned, but eventually on the 10th of March he was. But on the 2nd of March, when he put the club up for sale, that was really almost a move to say to the establishment, to the British government, I'll step away respectfully, and he was obviously trying to do that. And but then the sanctions, as they were imposed, obviously changed everything. And Chelsea was then a frozen asset, so the government had to issue a temporary operating licence, and the deadline for the sale was the 31st of May. That was the expiration of the temporary licence. Government were clear that wouldn't be renewed. So really, if Chelsea wasn't sold by the 31st of May in 2022, then the club would have gone into administration.
Because I remember those times vividly as a Chelsea fan, full disclosure, because there was this odd situation with Abramovich being sanctioned and therefore his assets being frozen, one of which happened to be a multi-billion-pound football club, that the club couldn't actually trade. It couldn't buy or sell players. It couldn't sell stuff in its stores. It couldn't pay players wages unless it had this temporary operating licence. So there was this kind of... The government did have to step in, as it were, to supervise the sale.
That's right. Obviously the subdivision of the Treasury, the Office for Financial Sanctions Implementation, obviously had to deal with all of that. And so on the day that Abramovich was sanctioned, then there was chaos really in the first instance, because it was a few hours before everybody really got on top of actually what exactly that would mean. Even the government and all the people I've spoken to across almost 2 years of work, interviewed more than 50 people for this book, and a couple of those people were two of the top sanctions lawyers in the UK in private practice, and everything they said about their recollections of and their findings of that period of time just generally completely chimed with everything that was experienced by people from Chelsea and other organisations that were dealing with sanctions, which was basically the government wasn't prepared for how to handle all of these things. And clearly there'd be a large amount of sympathy for something that was unprecedented. They never had to sort of impose sanctions on a scale like this before. But because it was the first time they were breaking new ground, it was something very difficult. And so there was an awful lot of chaos. And so there were a lot of very worried people at that time.
And one thing I've never understood is, how could Abramovich conduct a proper sale? Because anyone who came in looking to buy Chelsea would have said, well, we know you're, stuffed, frankly. You've been sanctioned. You effectively have to get rid of the club, or the club itself will kind of have to, as you said earlier, go into administration. How do you conduct a sale for fair value, if you like, in circumstances like that?
That's right. And effectively, they didn't, and he couldn't, so he had to step away. So Rain Bank, a merchant bank based with its headquarters in New York, they ran the process, and along with Bruce Buck, the Chelsea chairman, and really Granovsky, the chief executive, and one of the senior directors of the club. And so in conjunction, the three of those, the Rain and the two Chelsea executives, ran the whole process, and Abramovich couldn't really be involved in that. But yeah, basically it was the first sports edifice of that ilk to be sold really in a distressed sale. So in the end, even though it was a record purchase for a sports franchise globally at the time, a lot of independent analysts felt as though it was still in some ways a bargain, the deal, £4.25 billion overall.
And you allude earlier to kind of Abramovich changing the face of English football in some ways. I mean, he was beloved by Chelsea fans, which may or may not have been related to the fact that he delivered 19 trophies and titles to the club over a 19-year period. I always used to joke that he very handily won the Premier League every time I won an election, because I remember going to watch Chelsea win its first Premier League title just days after being elected as an MP in 2005. I mean, what was Abramovich's legacy? Because he comes out in your book as a sort of thoroughly decent bloke, actually. I mean, he comes over as a man who cared very deeply about the club and did the right thing by the club. Does he leave a good legacy or a bad legacy, leaving aside the politics of Russia and Ukraine?
I think it's a very strong legacy for Chelsea, especially because I think that obviously for the longest time he didn't talk and chose not to. But I think he felt that the best way for him to do his job was to put everything in place and then let the people he'd chosen for the specific roles fill those roles. And I think in terms of any kind of leadership, that's a very difficult thing to do, isn't it? To almost take a step back and trust the people you've put into those roles to carry them out to their fullest. But speaking to lots of people who worked for him throughout his tenure, what's consistent in everything that they said was he really did give them that license and therefore trust. And I think they all felt completely supported, which I think is quite a rare thing in terms of a boss, isn't it? And especially in terms of leadership. So it shows a real depth and strength of character in terms of his business focus, that's for sure.
You alluded to the fact you interviewed 50 people. One of them was Roman Abramovich. I think you interviewed him twice yeah. for the book. Probably I'm guessing here, but I suspect the first interviews he's ever given about this process, and one of the rare interviews he's given about owning Chelsea. Just tell us why he agreed to be interviewed. You presumably it was the first time you met him when you did interview him. What was he like, and what's he doing now? All these questions.
So I reported on the whole period of the sale process in my previous role as Chelsea correspondent for the Press Association. I was covering Chelsea.
Which I love. What a job title.
It was an amazing job. I was at PA for a long time and I absolutely loved it. And it's still a fantastic organisation, which is completely vital to, I think, our sporting and political institutions in this country. And it was a real privilege, and I was very proud to work for PA and to do that job. And across the period of that time, I built strong relationships with some of his people who weren't necessarily employed directly by Chelsea, but were some of his trusted advisors, shall we say. And in that period of time, because one of the things that they had launched in that period of time was the Say No to Anti-Semitism campaign, which became which certainly was groundbreaking.
Abramovich is Jewish, of course.
Yeah, which was groundbreaking, and also eventually would become award-winning. So I felt there was real news value in covering that. And so through some of the events that were linked to that, we built strong relationships and just kept in touch with them. And then roughly in about November 23, one of the conversations, just checking in with people to see how they were, turned to the fact that he might feel that the time was coming that he might want to sort of have his say. And I'd always slightly jokingly said, if he ever does want to talk, I'm your man. But that was always said with the understanding that it was very unlikely. But eventually he did decide he wanted to talk, and in the end that formed the basis for the book. Because it felt like that period of time, even while I was covering it, there was so much that was left unreported. There was always a really strong story. So I met him for the first time in Istanbul in January 2024, and then again in Abu Dhabi in January this year. So, and both interviews were sort of 4 or 5 hours, very long.
Wow.
And certainly the first time in Istanbul, met him in a house of one of his friends, and sort of walked in. He stood up, shook my hand, tapped me on the other shoulder, and said, "Hello, I'm Roman. Pleased to meet you. Ask me anything. Let's go." And really, across that 4 or 5 hours, I probably asked as many questions, because once he sort of got into his flow, it was a bit of a study in staying out, not making sure I didn't stop that flow.
Amazing. Dave texts in, why are you so complacent about a Russian crook lording it over Chelsea in London when his dubious background was well known? Saddening that leading Tories, he's referring to me, not you, were willing to turn a blind eye. Is that fair?
Well, no. I think one reason it's not fair, I mean, obviously everyone's entitled to their opinion. I think that he, for the longest time, complied and passed all the checks and balances that were required of him. He was welcomed with open arms to the Premier League in that period of time. The takeover, when it happened in 2003, was completed in hours. And
he was off Ken
Bates. He bought Chelsea for £140 million. And when Chelsea sold Eden Hazard to Real Madrid in 2019, that transfer topped out at £150 million. So one player was sold for more than Roman Abramovich paid for Chelsea, which indicates the scale of growth of the Premier League in that period of time. And I think Roman Abramovich himself has never been anything other than sanguine about everything that's led to his wealth. And even in the court case, the Berezovsky court case, he was very clear about certain things. And I feel that some of the things that happen within that, we've got to be careful in the UK in not transposing our cultures, attitudes and laws onto other parts of the world that operate differently.
Anyway, Nick Purewal, the author of Sanctioned, the inside story of the sale of Chelsea FC. Thanks for coming on the show. You'll be pleased by Kate's text. My dad worked for the PA for a very long time and loved it. That is his book on the takeover of Chelsea FC.